Hey everybody, this is Eric Rousseau with the Comedy Film Festival. We have a special interview that we are doing today for one of our honorable mentions. That is with Jonathan Teplitsky, the creative mind and force behind the movie Spit. Jonathan, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, my pleasure. It's great to be here, and it's great to have the film in your comedy festival.
Yeah, we're so happy to have it involved with this year's lineup. The honorable mentions are something that these are films for those that might not know, at least how we approach it. We only have so many, available slots, but these are films that if we could absolutely, play them, and we could, we want to be able to share them with the world is the biggest thing. So it's our way of amplifying films that we love, and giving them a special shout out. So with that, we're so happy to give the shout out to Spit. Tell us a little bit about the film. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm an Australian filmmaker. I've sort of, I guess, bided my time between England and Australia. I went to film school in England when on the back end of sort of backpacking around the world for a couple of years back in the 80s. And then I spent 20 years back in Australia, and then my partner and I came back here 10 years ago for work and various other things, and accidentally stayed. I mean, we came for 5 months and did one job, and we were both. My partner's also a director, and her and I were asked to do the same TV show, and so we ended up, doing that and enjoying it. And it was kind of a second home for me as well. I had a lot of friends and family here, so we've ended up just staying here. And and because I've sort of focused more on films and television, I guess, you can develop them. I developed Spit from England, in partnership with both the lead actor David Wenham and the writer Chris Neist. And because Spit, some people call it have sort of lazily called it a sequel, but it's actually not. It's a standalone movie. But it's the character that of Spit, Johnny Spiteri, is actually from a film the three of us made 25 years ago, which was a heist movie. And it was sort of an ensemble with Tim Spall and a cast of various others. And it was, as I said, an ensemble piece. And David played this character, Johnny Spiteri, who was a junkie who sort of got in the way of the entire heist and was a sort of crucial member, but not the lead. And we'd always sort of speculated on what it was, because we loved the character, and he sort of became an iconic comedic character because of the film in Australia over the last 25 years. And for a long, long time, we toyed with the idea of bringing him back in some capacity. And then I think it was important David was ready to play him again. And so we sort of made this, we came up with these ideas for this film. It was during lockdown mainly, with Chris and I sort of, Zoomed with each other, and he's in northern Queensland, and we just talked about ideas and sort of things that made us laugh and situations that you could put this character in. And that's what it grew out of. And at the same time, Australia has a very controversial, and has had for many, many years, immigration policy. And so Chris and I were also very keen on exploring something to do with that. And the two sort of came together in this film, because the story begins with, at the end of the last film 25 years ago, Johnny Spiteri got snuck off out of the country to avoid being arrested and what have you, and faked his own death. And then 25 years later, he comes back under a false name and passport and gets put into detention and makes friends with the sort of Middle Eastern community that are in an Australian detention camp. And that sort of kicks the story off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting to hear you talk about this, because for those that, want to check out Spit, this is something that I'll blame my own ignorance and I guess lack of research. I had no idea that it was a sort of sequel. It definitely stands on its own. Interested to check out the other film to give it more context. But don't be scared off if you haven't seen it. You can still enjoy Spit. I know that our team did. But it's really interesting and funny to hear you say this, because I'm also putting that together with your story of, you know, being between England and Australia. Did that kind of exile that the character Spit had in England, along with your kind of, you know, going between the two, influence at all? You know, what
Yeah,
went into the story?
it's an interesting question, but I think it. I mean, I think everything influences it in the way that you make these things. You know what I mean? And with this, I think a big part of it was one of the great conundrums about Australia is, like, I was reading, for example, I was just reading today about how parts of Australia were the first place in the kind of free world, if you want to call it that, to give women the vote in the later part of the 19th century. So that, you know, on one level, this country, this young, vibrant country, is on the front foot of equality and all these things. And yet it wasn't until the 60s until Indigenous people were given the right to vote. So that at the same time, they're on the back foot. And so Australia is a very sort of contradictory sort of country. You know, on one level, it's just an amazing place. On another level, it feels like it's harks back to the past. And it always there's this kind of vibrancy of conservatism versus progressivism, and that never quite goes away. And so a lot of people and a lot of artists have made their name, or made their careers, or made their exploration in the creative arts by leaving the country. And I think Australia is a better place the more people that leave and come back and bring the world, because it's a long way, it's a huge distance away from everything else. And so, you know, so in answer to your question, I think a lot of that energy, if you like, went into the idea of this character that has gone away to basically to run away, and then is drawn back, because it's a culture that you never quite leave behind, yet it's a culture that's always lacking in something that you go searching for. So, and it's sort of the irony of immigration in a way, that a country that is so born out of immigration, America being exactly the same, neither of them would have been countries anywhere like as sort of successful or vibrant or whatever you want to call them without immigration, without people coming from all over the world. And, you know, Johnny Spiteri is your classic, you know, second, third generation immigrant, grew up, became very Australian in that, you know, post-colonial type of culture, but then kind of had to leave because of, you know, petty crime and all the rest of it. And there's an irony there too, because so many people came to Australia originally, well, certainly from, you know, not you know, from the Western world, when it was colonized, came because they committed crime. So, you know, there's all those things going on, I guess. But the key about the film, one of the cornerstones to Australian culture in many ways, is this sort of elongated idea about mateship. And mateship is a very important ideal and idea in Australia. And that fundamentally that everyone is equal, and that it's about egalitarianism, which of course hardly ever exists. But in Spiteri's mind, everyone is equal until proven otherwise. And that's kind of the tone with which, you know, he carries. There's an unspoken thing in the film, which is basically, if you believe so much in mateship as a cornerstone of your culture, how, before knowing what anyone is like, regardless of where they're from, what religion they practice, the color of their skin, how can you possibly lock them up as people who don't belong here? And so, and that is at the heart of much of Australian, half a dozen elections were won and lost on exactly that question. And within that context, you know, many documentaries and films have been made, and, you know, very serious ones. We thought, what happens if you put this comedic character in the middle of this? Where do you go? What do you explore? You know, and you know, when we played just the most recent in America at a festival, we played and because immigration is such a huge thing at the moment in America, it was amazing how many of the audience just said how great it was to watch something about that topic, but to be able to laugh along with it, and at the irony and at the contradictions that exist.
Well, Jonathan, you brought up so many good points that I want to dive into. I think one of them, that last idea, talk a little bit about like finding that balance of, this important topic, but like subverting it and making it satirical with this very, very goofy kind of character. Tell us a little bit about how that went with your creative team.
Well, I think if you just you look at a big picture of what I guess art is, or what creative expression is, I think the more rules that are applied to it, the more it ceases to be exactly that, and I think that's part of the problem with a lot of stuff that's made now, is that too many rules are applied to what is going to make this successful, what is not, and all those things, and I think the idea is that so comedy, I think, is a completely legitimate tool or genre or whatever you want to call it to explore any serious topic, because I think you identify and reveal both human failings, human dignity, human behavior so clearly through comedic things, in the same way as, in many ways, there's been in the last sort of recent times many interesting horror films that have kind of used the genre to explore racism, to explore whatever. And so I think comedy is a very good tool to do that. The other great thing about comedy is that if you're vaguely successful at making an audience laugh, it's amazing the journey and distance you can take them on, and often into areas that, and into ideas that they don't necessarily agree with. And so by making people laugh, it kind of opens a door, if you like, into ideas. And that was kind of always our thing, is in answer to your question about balance, because I think comedy works best when it comes out of something real, where there's an integrity and a emotional truth to it, like any drama. But at the same time that is juxtapositioned with something heartfelt, that is emotionally truthful, that is both serious and funny at the same time. I mean, most, it's a cliche, but so many comedians and so many comedic characters, there's along with the hilarity, there is also often a sense of sadness or a sense of melancholy, or all these kind of array of human emotions. And I think that can apply to both character and the themes and topics that you're dealing with, in providing a fantastic sort of tableau and juxtaposition, so that it's not just trying to be gag after gag after gag.
It's interesting when you say all that and put it within what this world is, because if you go way back and just kind of think about classic comedy tropes, essentially what you have is an absolutely absurd character in a very serious situation. And how Spit is moving through this, it almost kind of feels, like a Buster Keaton, like a Charlie Chaplin.
It is very much that. Yeah.
And And so maybe we'll kind of go down that path. Did y'all look at any kind of of those classic examples as you were pulling? Did you work with David and kind of develop, what is, and maybe some of this goes back to the first movie, the physicality, the delivery, the overall, mindset of Spit.
Yeah. When we did the first film all those years ago, David and I talked a lot about voice, about, David was living in an area of Sydney that there were particularly then a lot of junkies wandering around the streets. So he was able to get, engage with the voice and the behavior and the posture. And, a lot of what is funny in the film is his physicality, which is very, Chaplin-esque, Buster Keaton-esque. But one of the origins of the character, the writer of both films, Chris Neist, is one of the is one of the biggest criminal justice lawyers in Queensland, in the state where we made the film. And one day, many, many years ago, probably about 30 years ago, he was asked, he was cornered by someone in the courthouse to come into court number one and basically have a look at something. And it was basically this guy in the courtroom who was spinning a tale of absolute ridiculousness, but had somehow managed to kind of like take control of the whole case. And to this day, Chris always, and this has always been our adage about, and our kind of driving force with Spiteri, is you never quite know whether he's the smartest or the dumbest guy in the room. And everything, you know, it's great when you've got that beacon, if you like. So every scene, okay, so what is it? Is he trying to be the smartest? Is he the dumbest? What are we trying, you know, there's always an element of that, of that's what the scene's about. So for example, you know, in the scene, you know, that very funny scene in the, well, I hope it's funny to me anyway, where he's trying to get, they're at child services because he's trying to take, after, without giving anything away, he's trying to get custody of his nephew, and he kind of explains in a way his drug taking history, that is both ridiculous, but also it's his truth, and so when he believes it, he can make an audience believe it, and I think that's what not only makes him a kind of lovable, sympathetic character, regardless of what behaviour he's done, but at the same time, it just sets up the idea of, I think, a great place to be comedically, because it comes out of something truthful to that character. And one of the great challenges of this film, in fact, when we did the original film, you know, he was a fully fledged junkie. This supposedly is many, many years later, after he's been through rehab overseas and all the rest of it. He's an ex-junkie. But so what does that do to his voice? What does that do to his, because part of the comedy is in the voice, is in the, so we had to work very hard at finding sort of a junkie hangover for behavioural stuff, for voice and all that stuff, without letting go of some of the great comedy that we developed in the first film, or David had with the character, because we didn't want him to become a bland character as well. So, you know, it was kind of like a real balancing act. That.
And I'm curious, you know, the very first scene, so this isn't going to be ruining anything.
Yeah.
The very first scene of the movie is the plane that is carrying Spit landing back in Australia.
Yeah.
So, you know, oftentimes filmmakers and creative teams, they set up, you know, what's now called MacGuffins, something that happens in a film that is the central plot that moves everything forward, but it doesn't necessarily, you know, it's never resolved. It never has a good reason.
Or there's a twist to it or something. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a twist, you know, something along those lines. And so, you know, with this, like and so you can choose to answer or not, but like there is this, what you've shared about like the creative process, what you've shared about the character of Spit, it is kind of like, why does he decide to return back to Australia after all these years in exile? Is that something y'all discussed, or you're just like, well, you know, he's kind of wandering through life, so he would eventually find his way back?
There is a little bit early on that explains it, which is that he got arrested selling out of licensed Disney products, and had to kind of, and he's probably been doing that sort of thing to make a living, to survive for a long time, and has probably hopped around, you know, the Mediterranean, shall we say, staying one step ahead of the law. And then when he comes back and he's anonymous in a way, which is why he sort of tries to sneak back in on a false name and passport, gets put into detention, and that's kind of kicks the story off, because he makes friends with this community, and then when he finally does get out of there, his past starts to catch up with him. So, I mean, without giving anything away, the reason he comes back, I guess, there's a lot of reasons. You know, I think, when you're that sort of character who's always on the bones of their ass, who's always just trying to survive, you know, there's no place like home. You know, particularly when it's sunny, particularly when it's, you know, it's a paddock, you know, and I think he probably just pined for that ease of the culture that he knew and the home that he knew, but at the same time, you know, was probably it was probably on the spur of the moment. He had the opportunity because he found some dead guy's passport, and you know, faked the whole thing. That it was just an opportunity, and he's probably just spent his entire life chasing opportunities. You know.
That makes sense. Well, it sounds like there's been, you know, whether a festival run or, you know, one-off screenings that have been happening all over the place. I'm sure Australia, the States, and across Europe. You know, I'm curious, like, where y'all are at with the film. Is it ready to be released stateside? Are y'all doing any other kind of special screenings?
Look, we're trying. Yes, we are, and you know, the producers are in Australia, so I don't have a day-to-day thing on. But my understanding is that they're in negotiations now with a distributor in. I mean, you know, myself, Chris, David, we're not at the beginning of our careers. You know, we've been doing this for 35 years, and we were really a number of streamers offered to invest and to make the film. We wanted to do something that would play in the cinema, partly because that collective comedic experience of an audience all laughing together, we felt was really important. And certainly the screenings we have had, both in Australia and outside of Australia, sort of brought home how important that was. And also, we all started off, you only ever thought about making films for the cinema, and so I guess we're looking. You know, it's a harder road, particularly for independent film now, but we're certainly, you know, willing to put the effort in and find, you know, the right distributors in America and throughout Europe to release the film. Hopefully, in some territories, people get to see it theatrically. So that's kind of where we're at. What's great about being in festivals like this, that, you know, the great thing about comedy when it works is that people who distribute movies can make a fair judgment quite quickly about, well, if it is funny, then audiences might like this, you know. And so, you know, that's kind of, you know, it's great to be in your festival. It's great to be in the other festivals we've been in, because it shows people that, you know, the audience reaction has been very good, and, you know, hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you hit on a huge thing that, you know, we go into the festival with. I mean, we have to, and that's, I think that there's been this relegation of comedy to, you know, just going straight to streaming, or comedy is just something that happens on TV shows now. But it is a genre that is to be celebrated in the cinema around people, because just as I think you mentioned, and I often do the same thing of liken comedy as an umbrella genre to something like horror.
Yeah,
that collective gasp and, you know, moment in a horror film, it's the same kind of feeling when you're sitting in an auditorium and you're laughing with 50 to 200 people. Like, that's so exhilarating to, you know, just be barreled over and your stomach hurting because it's so funny. And Spit definitely has those moments. So I'm excited for y'all to go down this path.
The great thing about cinema has always been the visceral experience you have sitting in the dark there and sharing the experience with other people. And, you know, that's what, you know, I think for people at the your festival and elsewhere watching the film, I think it is a funny film, and it's it's quite Australian in tone, but I think the themes of it and the characterizations within it, are universal, and that's when comedy works, it kind of touches on all that universality, really.
So I know it's always an interesting point at a film's life when you're at the festival run, and especially when you're courting distribution, because that's really where your focus is. But I do always like to check in and see, whether it's you by yourself or you and the creative team behind Spit, you all working on the next project. What else do you all have brewing?
Well, I think, myself and and David and Chris, we're always certainly Chris and I we were always talking about ideas. We've written other scripts together, et cetera, et cetera. David and I, David was in my first movie, which is probably 30 years ago now. And we're kind of mates as well. And we really enjoy working together. And so exploring ideas, both comedic and otherwise, is, we have a constant dialogue about that. I'm actually writing something myself at the moment, which hopefully we'll shoot in the UK. But the three of us have a very ongoing, and the wider team as well. A lot of the crew, the DOP, all the heads of department who worked on this film worked on pretty much the earlier film, and I've worked with on 4 or 5 other movies that I've done. So, it's an opportunity to, in a sense, revisit your second family with these people, because you've had whole careers together, and so there's always ideas and always exploring things. But independent film is a very, very tricky monkey. It's harder now than ever before to probably get films made. We don't have the video and DVD and all those sales as part of the financing package. It's kind of like equity from often private investors, or equity from film bodies and streamers. But it's hard because streamers want it for the streaming. So it's trying to keep the budgets low enough, but also at the same time have the ambition to make good films, really, and whether they're comedy or otherwise.
For everything that this film is, I'm really excited for people to watch it, for people to explore it. It's, I think people can probably pick up from our conversation here. It's got a lot, There's this kind of like thriller mafioso kind of like crime undertone that's happening, along with like some like detective, like Law and Order type stuff, some socio-political things that are going on with like the immigration side, and I think at the core of it, not only do you have this very surprisingly kind, sweet, and absurd spirit in Spit, but you also have these very sweet relationships that he has that are kind of orbiting around him in both friendship and in family.
Yeah.
And just as a whole, want to say thank you for making this film, and thank you for thinking about our festival.
Oh, look, it's a real pleasure. The film was a real labor of love, and people ask me how long did it take to get together, and in many ways it's been brewing for 25 years since we did the first one. And David created a character. I mean, it was a brilliant piece of writing to start with, but David took that and created a character, and we worked together at bringing it to the screen in a way that it became indelible in many ways, and a lot of people know who the character is and haven't even they've heard of the character, haven't even seen the film, but and I think that's the great comedic characters of cinema history and otherwise, they've sort of found a niche and and a place that feels natural and real and truthful. And often they carry with them quite a strong emotional anchor, whether it's to do with grief or loss, or to do with, you know, that they're just fuck ups in this world, or that they're just whatever they are. There's generally some kind of, there's certainly hurdles, and they carry that baggage, out of which comes, you know, the richness of the comedy. And I think that's, you know, partly that's what, you know, with great depth David brought to the character.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today, and be on the lookout for Spit as it does get released. Hopefully you'll be able to catch it in a theater.
Yeah. And listen, thanks very much for having us, and nice talking to you. And I hope people enjoy the film. I'd love to hear how it plays with your audience when it does play.
Awesome. All right. And you can catch the entire Comedy Film Festival May 8th through 10th in Austin, Texas. We hope to see you there.